I'm really honored to have the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee to join us this morning, Congressman Mac Thornberry from the great state of Texas. Mac represents the 13th District of Texas and has done an extraordinary job as the leader of the House Armed Services Committee in really elevating the effort necessary to rebuild our military. You know, we've had a lot of challenges with the military in recent years with modernizing our forces, making sure we have proper training. And folks in the Hampton Roads area, well, actually across Virginia, really understand what it takes to provide for our military and to do the things that are necessary in the best interest of the nation. And we understand, too, that places like Virginia are critical to make sure we have what's necessary for our Navy, for our Army, for our Air Force, and even tangentially for our Coast Guard. And we know, too, both with the Navy, the component of the Navy, the Marine Corps is a extraordinarily important part of that. And the efforts that it takes to make sure that we have a military that can stand up against the threats around the world is a continual challenge. And I can't think of anybody that has done it better than Chairman Mac Thornberry. He's really been focused on what's necessary, has done an extraordinary job in working in a bipartisan way to get things done. In fact, under his leadership this year, folks, the National Defense Authorization Act has been passed sooner than at any time in the last 18 years. And with the challenges we have in front of us, this is absolutely necessary. And just the other day at Fort Drum in New York, the president signed that into law. Now our next challenge is to get the appropriations done to make sure our military is properly funded. So I'm really honored to have with us this morning Chairman Thornberry. And Mac, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Appreciate it.
Well, listen, we appreciate all the things that you do, and you know all the moving parts that go into getting the pieces put together for our nation's military. And I wanted to get your perspective about the importance of passing the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 that was signed into law back in February so that we get the proper funding for our nation's defense, which this year is slated to be at $716 billion. Now, to put that in perspective, the previous year, it was $700 billion. So this is the track of increasing the number of dollars that go to rebuild our military. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on that element and then where that leads us next in the things that we need to do.
I don't think it's possible to overstate how important that Bipartisan Budget Act that was signed into law by the president back in February is for our military. And I know that there were a variety of people who criticized it as spending too much, spending too little, not having this, that, or the other thing in it. But if you remember the context, we have been for years in operating under these temporary stopgap spending measures. And if you look at military funding from 2010 to 2017, it was cut by more than 20%. And what you and I witnessed is an alarming increase in accidents of various kinds, including those accidents that resulted in military deaths. Because while we were cutting the military budget 20%, the world did not get 20% safer, and we did not expect 20% less from our military. So the heart of the matter to me is the Bipartisan Budget Act locked in budget numbers for 2018 and 2019 that begin to turn that around, that begin to rebuild our military and to give us the numbers that we know we're going to spend. So, as you pointed out, we have already gotten signed into law by President Trump the defense authorization bill, the earliest that it's been in many, many years. And just yesterday, the Senate passed the defense appropriation bill to match. And the House had already done that, of course. We did it in July. So we're not only able to spend more on the military, we have a real chance of doing it on time, which I know doesn't sound like much, but it's a big deal when it comes to our military.
Well, it is, Mac. You point out making sure that we avoid these continuing resolutions. And while some folks may not know what those are, I think a lot of folks here do, but a continuing resolution is just kind of kicking the can down the road. It just says, hey, we're not going to make any decisions. We're just going to spend at the same levels. We're not going to make any changes. You can't start anything new, instead of making the tough decisions about what we spend on or what we don't spend on. So I agree. Having that certainty going forward is going to be key. Folks, you're listening to the John Frederick Show, and this is Rob Wittman. I'm guest hosting for John this morning, and we're honored to be joined by the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mac Thornberry. And Mac, you were talking about the importance of the Bipartisan Budget Act, and you alluded to not only the National Defense Authorization Act getting passed early, but the importance of getting this appropriations bill done. And I want to get your perspective on where we are now, because as you said, the House has passed its defense appropriations bill, and now the Senate has passed its appropriations bill. And there's a process in Washington called a conference committee where you work out those differences. And when we get back on September 4th, we have 11 legislating days left before the end of the fiscal year. So give me your perspective on the things that need to happen and how all these pieces have to fit together in order for us to make sure we get that on time, which, by the way, would be precedent setting. That hasn't happened in the last 10 years. But if it happens this year, and I'm very hopeful and positive that it will be a tremendous, tremendous positive impact for our military.
No, I'm with you. I think now we know what the numbers are thanks to the Bipartisan Budget Act. As you pointed out, we'll spend $16 billion more in fiscal year 19 than we spent in 18, which is not a giant increase, but it's at least headed in the right direction versus what's happened in previous years. But the key is you lose the benefit of that extra money if you don't get it on time. And I think most of us can understand that if you don't know how much money you're going to spend, or if you're under these spending restraints that you were just talking about, that you have to spend the same money this year that you spent last year, you can't start anything new, and even if you want to quit spending on something you don't need anymore, you still have to spend it on that because of these spending rules. If we can get away from all that and actually get the military their money, a whole year's military money, on time for a change, they can make so much better use of it. They can do more to fix our ships. They can plan their training cycles for the whole year. They can buy things more economically to get more value for the military and for the taxpayer dollars. It just makes a big difference. I think we can do it this year. We just have to have enough folks who are willing to put politics aside for a second and just do the right thing.
No, listen, I agree, Mac. This is one of those critical tipping points where all the effort that's gone into getting the proper authorization in place to get resources where we need them has to be followed by the appropriations bill getting done. And you point out a really good point that I want our listeners to understand, and I want to get maybe your continued perspective on it. When you talk about continuing resolutions and what is inefficient about them, it really is not just inefficiency, it's a waste. And I'm going to go to what the Secretary of the Navy stated when he was asked about what impact does a continuing resolution have on just the Navy. In his words, not mine, he said, for the Navy, in the past 9 of 10 years, continuing resolutions, these temporary spending measures, that has resulted in a waste of $4 billion for our United States Navy. Now think about that. That would allow us to construct a Virginia-class submarine or a couple of DDG-51 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, 3,000 Harpoon missiles, all things that we need, yet those dollars are wasted. And again, the Secretary of the Navy's words, not mine, he said, that's putting that $4 billion into a trash can and burning it. So your point of the importance and the significance this year of getting these appropriations bills done on time and making sure that people set aside some of the politics that normally happens, I think is critical. So you have really, I think, clarified that. But I wanted to get your perspective too on how important that is, and and put that in the realm, too, of what you have done as the chairman and really focusing on making the House Armed Services Committee bipartisan and the efforts on armed services bicameral. I wanted to get your perspective on the importance of that also.
Well, you're kind, but the truth is we've got a great team, and I'll take you as an example. Nobody knows more about our Navy than you do, but you have also formed a great partnership with the ranking Democrat on your subcommittee, Joe Courtney, so that whenever a Navy issue comes up or anything in the broader jurisdiction of your subcommittee, y'all do it together as a team. I think most of us believe the first job of the federal government is to defend the country, and that job is so important with lives on the line that we need to put politics aside and just do the right thing by the military. And I think you and Joe Courtney have exemplified that, not only this year, but throughout the time that y'all have been leading the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee. So it's not me, it's the team. It's Republicans and Democrats who believe so strongly in the military that they're willing to do whatever it takes to support the military, including put aside partisan agendas. We were talking about continuing resolutions. As you remember, one of the challenges in the past has been some people, and I'll say especially some people in the Senate, have agreed that we need to spend more on the military, but they were holding that spending hostage. They would not vote to increase military funding unless they got increases in their other favorite programs, domestic programs. That's the other thing the Bipartisan Budget Act broke through. No longer can the military be held hostage. We know how much we're going to spend, and you're seeing not only our bill, the Defense Authorization Bill, already signed into law, the earliest it's been in many years, but you see the appropriations bills to match with the exact same numbers that are also moving faster than they have in years. And I hope that with all the controversy about our politics these days, that we can at least be that example of where Republicans and Democrats who believe in national security, who care about our military, are able to put other concerns aside, work together to get things done for the military. If this year continues like it has, it's going to be a very good year for that.
Oh, I agree, Mac. And folks, we are being joined by the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mac Thornberry, and getting his perspectives on the things that are happening with our nation's defense. And Mac, as you know, many of our listeners in this area support the Department of Navy in some way, whether they're in uniform or the civilians or critical contractors, suppliers, or builders. In fact, earlier this week, we were with the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce. A big issue there for the chamber are things happening with our military. I was just out at Huntington Ingalls Industries, better known as Newport News Shipbuilding, learning about all the great things that are going on there, not just now, but what they're planning for in the future. So I wanted to get your perspective on some of the key NDAA provisions as they pertain to sailors and Marines, both in readiness. You know, a lot of times we get so focused on ship construction that we fail to talk about the other things, the things we do to support our sailors and our Marines, and what we do to make sure we're maintaining the ships that they rely on in their duties. So I wanted to get your perspective on what you think the most important provisions are that are now in the NDAA and signed into law that relate to our Navy and Marine Corps team.
Well, I think you always start with the most important part, and you've mentioned it, and that is our people. This year's Defense Authorization Bill has the largest pay raise for our uniformed military that we've had in 9 years. And so they're still not going to get rich off service, but I think it helps families make ends meet, and it's also an important signal to say we value what you do for our nation. And so there's a pay raise and some other benefit issues. You highlight the very important issues of training. And, for example, we had these tragic accidents last year in the Pacific that largely resulted from a lack of adequate training. And so we were putting sailors in positions where they were not adequately prepared for what they were being asked to do, and partly because we didn't have enough ships, and the missions were not abating, especially protecting our country from missile launch from North Korea. So this year's bill, we try to improve that. Lots more money for training, and then you and have authored a number of provisions that were included in this year's NDAA to ensure that the proper command and appropriate safeguards are put in place to make sure that sailors are not put in that position again where they're asked to do things for which they're not adequately prepared. And finally, I just have to say, again, thanks to you and Joe Courtney's leadership, we have more ships. More ships are authorized, and more ships will be funded than the administration asked for. As we keep saying, the world is not getting any safer. The Navy is crucial, and we just don't have enough ships to meet the demand that the dangerous world is providing. So, among other things, authorizing us 2 carriers and building more ships. Again, you can't fix these problems in 1 year, but you can be headed in the right direction. I think this year's bill definitely is for the Navy and for the other services.
Well, Mac, I think all those things, as you point to, are part of great teamwork. It's leadership from the top. You and Adam Smith are extraordinary in what you do to encourage all members, including the subcommittee chairman, to get out there and to gather the information, to do the work, to make sure we have an NDAA like we've had this year. And I wanted to, in just a few minutes we have remaining, get you to reflect on the NDAA itself. You know, a lot of people think about, well, what's authorization and appropriation? It's kind of confusing for folks, but I wanted you to just explain briefly about, you know, what authorization is and what that does to really lay the groundwork for what ultimately happens in the military each year.
Yeah, this is kind of like our textbooks that we learned in junior high about how a bill becomes law and how it all works, because it starts in subcommittee, and there are the members of the subcommittee write the bill, there are amendments in subcommittee, and then you go through full committee, and this year I think we had 300 or 400 amendments that were considered in full Armed Services Committee. It goes to the floor where there are many more amendments that are considered. The Senate does the same thing, and then you reconcile the differences in the House and Senate bill, have another vote on it, and then it goes to the president. The authorization bill is the blueprint. It says what we need to, how many bullets and tanks and ships and planes we need to buy, and all of the policy issues. Whether we're going to be able to provide F-35s in Turkey, for example. It's a large bill. This year ended up being over 1,000 pages. And then later comes the appropriation bill, which is writing the check for the things you decided you were going to spend in the authorization bill. So the two go together. Defense is the last area where we do this authorizing and appropriating, and we do it, again, the old-fashioned way. I am particularly proud that this year's bill, thanks to a great team, including you, as I've said, passed the House by a vote of, the Conference Report passed the House by a vote of 359 to 54, and it passed the Senate, I think, 89 to 10. So you had overwhelming bipartisan votes in support of the bill, more importantly in support of the military and the country's national security. And I think it's so important that we do everything we can to maintain that bipartisan support in national security, even if we disagree about taxes and health care and other issues.
Well, I agree, Mac. This is one of those fundamental constitutional responsibilities that we have. We all know Article 1, Section 8, and what we have to do. And it's refreshing with all the division we hear many times, whether it's in the media or in Washington, that there is still some bipartisanship there and some bicameral relationships that happen in passing this National Defense Authorization Act. And again, I go back to this. It's about leadership. It's about making sure that there's an emphasis there. It's about what you do with your colleague Adam Smith and setting the example for us, and you working with our colleagues over in the Senate, Senator Imhoff, Senator Reid, and getting those things done. So I really want to thank you for your leadership, because this doesn't happen without direction from the top, and you've been very empowering by allowing members of the committee to be very active with this, and subcommittee chairmen to get out there and to do that work that's necessary to make this bill what it is. So I really appreciate all of your leadership and what you've done. We wouldn't be where we are today without that. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us this morning